idea of a permanent spot to go to. And we spent an awful lot of very, very happy moments and years there. It was very, I don't think anybody, and I don't know of all the fishermen that I know, that really had, when I look back, as much fun going to places that we had gone to together. And then, of course, as the kids grew up, we took them along, and it was a very exceptional vacations that we would take and look forward to every Memorial Day.
Yeah, well, Mac talked to that before tonight, and I joined in by indicating that I was able to go with you for almost 4 or 5 years. And then eventually your grandchildren, Max's grandchildren, and my son joined us. And in the meantime, among the fishermen, we've had Sam going out to Newfoundland and doing, I think there was a...
too.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think you did some bow and arrow hunting at one time, too.
Yes, I did some bow and arrow.
Just as a little variety.
Yes.
But I just wanted to see if we could get a little picture. And now you have 2 sisters that aren't here in the room tonight. One is in Florida, and the other is my mother. What do you remember about them in your childhood? How was the role of sisters?
I would say a little bit about that. My sister B, your mother, was had a good friends. In the days of the hard to get along, her good friends became boarders. And our 8 needed help. Potentially, they were served at that, so we split bedrooms and whatever. There was Bertha Lewis and
Myrna?
By the way, Sammy Bach died about 2 weeks ago.
And Lena Lewis. And then there was Myrna. Myrna became Rosenberg's, Marv Rosenberg's stepmother.
Yeah.
That's the family part of it.
By the way, yes.
So the girls and the boys got along pretty well as brothers and sisters?
Libby was a tomboy. She was athletic. She almost married a bicycle rider.
Uncle Sam, do you remember growing up with Libby as a sister when the 2 of you were the closest in age?
Oh, yes.
Was she tough to deal with as an older sister?
Oh, she sure was. Anybody that got near me, I'd sick her onto them, and she'd beat the hell out of them. She's the toughest kid in the neighborhood.
Your other brothers weren't around to do that?
No, they wouldn't. They didn't want to protect me, but she did.
I don't know. I remember pushing him around the buggy, spent plenty of hours pushing him around the buggy.
Yeah, but as soon as I got out of the buggy, he went to work.
I heard you were in the buggy last week. Is that possible?
Yeah, I'll tell you a later story.
So,
Phil and me were out at the golf course about 2 months ago. And we're playing, and after the 9th hole, the fellow that was playing with us says,
he says he remembers
how old are
everything
you
like
guys?
a different man.
You know, we play fairly well.
Who's this?
So,
Get on. Max says he wasn't talking much.
I listen to what's going on. Everything that's said is true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a tough childhood.
Yeah, very.
Because you were the quiet one. You never used to do
he
anything.
wasn't so quiet.
What do you mean he wasn't quiet?
Where I live today,
He was the roaster boy.
one girl tells me this, a girl, when Shakespeare, when Napoleon was a cadet. This particular girl says, you know, your brother Mac, I had a prom, and I asked him if he would take me to the prom. He says yes. My mother brought me a beautiful dress and everything, and when I got the day of the prom, everything was okay. I was out, dolled up with a nice, beautiful dress and shoes, and you know what? Mac didn't show up.
Now, how do you deal with that kind of a reputation?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very
Did you have a better
You
offer?
promised 6 different girls to go to the
I
prom.
really, I didn't feel that night.
Oh,
Was their first, which was their first house.
Yes.
And it was a big deal for Sam and I to take a streetcar and get out to Brookfield.
traveling on your own and...
Traveling on our own and hiking.
How many streetcars did you take to get there?
I don't remember.
You don't remember, but that
I
was
remember the house that your parents had out there.
All right, well, thanks for that insight. You know, I've been talking primarily to the men of the Kasper clan, and we have 2 of the ladies who have been their partners for several years.
You're going to be 50 in a couple of months.
And how about you, Aunt Arnice? How many years you?
How many years for us?
For marriage, yeah.
Well, it'll be 50 in December.
Okay. So what we have is a situation where you've been a part of their lives for those many years. And Aunt Arnice, tell me a little bit, what did you think about meeting Uncle Sam and his family when you first became part of it?
Oh, do I have to tell you?
So in other words, your attitude...
I was in for a state of shock because I came from a family of two. It was just my brother and I, and here I come to Canopara family. Wow, they're coming out of the walls.
And they all...
I didn't have any.
And they all had children at that time too, as I think they...
Wait. Bill had children, and Bea had children. No, not Eddie. Not Matt, Joe.
No, but the family had already started, so when you dealt with one, you dealt with many.
You were here already.
Yeah, and Eleanor, you came along in about 1940 also, because that...
and 3 months.
After...
No, 3 months before. They were married before
Right,
October,
okay.
and they were married in December.
All right, so has it been difficult dealing with your in-laws?
Which in-law do you mean?
Well, I'm referring to your brothers and sisters-in-law.
No problem. We
It's been
know them all.
It's been a wonderful experience.
It's been wonderful. And it should
How did you
continue.
meet Uncle Sam, Aunt Arnice?
Boy, do I really want it down on paper.
Yeah.
It's,
You picked them up?
it's school. Really?
I mean, you were schoolmates together.
No. He used to come around my school. He used to hang around Marshall High School. That's how I met him.
Uh-huh.
dating someone else at the time? I don't know. He may have had a girlfriend there.
How about you? Were you dating someone then?
Who, me?
Yes.
No, I wasn't dating him.
Oh.
Why did you take your glasses off? No, nobody without glasses. No, because I can't see with the glasses.
Now,
I can't see
how about Eleanor? How did you meet Matt?
I went to pick up my Aunt Rose's coat.
At the Furriers?
Yeah.
Wasn't there any preconception that maybe it'd be a nice thing for you to do to go and see what the guy at the shop looked
I was
like?
engaged to another fellow at the time.
You were engaged to another...
Worcester, Massachusetts. At 18 years old, I came home to decide whether I really wanted to do it or not.
And you went into the
And
fur shop.
Speaking of this young lady that's sitting next to me, a cute story is the first night that we went out together, he took me to the Sheridan Theater. We came out and there was no gas in the car. And he said, my brother Sam and our niece, every time they go out together, they leave me with an empty tank. And I'm thinking to myself, what kind of a brother goes with a niece? And for 2-3 months, that's all I heard is Sam and our niece, Sam and our niece. And I thought to myself, this is really a crazy family.
So
Then I found out.
that it is, and it hasn't changed much in all the time.
No, it turned out.
Well, tonight our niece is hosting with Sam a farewell for Eleanor and Mac, and after 50 years of struggling through your relationship, you're about to wish a long and healthy life, and with that we'll come to a conclusion. Thanks for helping us.
I just our family, at least for the time being, and hope to see everybody next year in good health.
Al Avai.
Amen.
wall of her, on the wall in her bedroom was a picture, two pictures, in addition to a picture of Ben Gurion. There was a picture of my mother and father's wedding, and the picture that you were holding of the Kasper family that your mother had sent to her, and that she had carried with her as possessions throughout her life in the Second World War, and
Now,
her.
this was my mother's sister?
Tanti Mirka.
My
Remember?
mother's sister.
You're the one who gave me the address on Mirka and said if I was going to Israel, I'd have to find her. And we had an address and we traced it down. Now she...
What happened to the boys?
She had, Mirka had a daughter, Ida, who also had a brother. And the brother has remained in the Soviet Union. And that would be your first cousins. And he was an officer in the Soviet Army. And is a non-practicing Jew and married a non-Jewish woman and decided to stay in the Soviet Union where he retired. I'm not sure whether he's still alive because I'm talking 10 years ago. But at that time I met Ida, who would be your first cousin. Her Yiddish name was Idka, and she had a son who his name was Zev, Z-E-V, and I believe the married name was Zezersky, Z-E-Z-E-R-S-K-I, and they went to New York City, or New York the state, and settled in Brooklyn. And they called once or twice and almost came to Chicago about 8 or 9 years.
It was just a neighborhood ride or something.
And then they realized it was a 1,100-mile round one way. And
but in that time, there was also this Joseph that used to constantly write to my mother, and she always used to manage to send him money.
That was a survivor of the Holocaust that lived in either Poland or Israel?
No, he lived in Israel.
In Israel. We've never had any further contact with him.
Two brothers, well, evidently they're... when the second brother came in, one was David and one was Joseph. The first one was a school teacher and used to write about his family, and he was very, very nice about everything that he seemed to write about. He used to tell us about how hard it was for him to get along, and plenty of times my mother, either through me or through, what was her girlfriend's name? Her son was a broker. A big, very Slavish type of kid.
It's not very flattering, Uncle Phil.
That, Yetta.
Oh, you mean Schwab?
Yetta Schwab. And her, what's her son's name?
Seymour.
Seymour Schwab, yeah. She used to do a lot of writing because my mother couldn't write. And she used to do a lot of correspondence. She knew more about the things that my mother did, not knowing from any of us, but taking money what you would often need on the table, which she didn't have too much of, and sending to him.
So she became the Scribner, the writer, and in that capacity, both as she was also a landsman of Grandma, Mrs. Schwab,
yes.
and she wrote the letters in Hebrew or Yiddish and sent them to your mother's nephew. Is that who it was?
Yeah, that's right. Now, when the other brother came in from Russia or something, he came in and he, through some misunderstanding, whatever it was under the impression that everybody in America was very, very wealthy and that he had a very wealthy family. And he wrote telling us what hardships he had and if we couldn't help him. And we sent him money constantly until one time we got a letter, and he actually said in a letter, he says, sending me $10 bills, $15 bills is a drop in the bucket. I can't do anything with this kind of thing. I'm a shoemaker. I would like to open up a shoe store. I would need money to open up and buy machinery so I can open up a shoe store. Well, we were just skimping by at that time with the fur business, whatever it was, and we couldn't help him. There was a Suvalker organization
That was a organization based in Chicago, of people who had been so-called landsmen in the old country.
Right. And they went back and they, through my mother or whatever it was, got the names of these people and they visited them in Israel. And they were told that when we get to Chicago, and somehow or other, I mean, the Kasper family was always judged as being better off than what we were. Because we managed to live and do things that other people couldn't do, just like on our fishing trips, as you know. What would cost somebody else $2,000 to $3,000 would cost us $500 to $600, and we'd have 10 guys doing it, because we ate differently and we enjoyed ourselves. We didn't go to expensive places, and this is the way I grew up. Of course, I didn't get back to the time when we came in from Michigan City to Chicago to indicate some of the hardships that I went through with my father, which we can never forget, because at that time it was a war times.
Which war was this now?
This was the First World War.
So, okay.
It was 1918, 1919, 1920. My dad was left out of the tannery in Michigan City, of which he was the superintendent. He had a pretty nice job there, also at the Wiffenbach family. But G.W. Wiffenbach, that was the last tannery that my dad operated for him. So when we couldn't make a living in a city like Michigan City, we had him move. He thought he'd been moved to Chicago, where he could, a big city, he can always make a living. And he tried getting into different places with his knowledge of leathers and so forth, and he couldn't. And having a family that needed to eat every day with a bunch of kids, he went out and he tried doing some peddling. He'd rent a horse and wagon. In those days, there used to be peddlers going through the alleys with vegetables, picking up rags and iron. Well, at first he didn't have money to buy vegetables, because then you have to have an outlet, but renting a horse and picking up rags and iron, that was something else again, that we were doing. And I'd sit on the wagon along beside him, and he would go through the alley and crying, or not crying, but yelling, "Old rags, old iron, old rags, old iron," to let people know that their junk man is here, and they would come out and call him in every once in a while. And
well, he was one of the first of the commodities brokers.
Commodities brokers, right. And then we later on got into vegetables, and I remember in disgust one time, as he was calling out rags and iron, he let out an outburst, and he thought it was very funny at that time. He says, "Dreckle iron, you know, Dreckle iron."
What does dreck mean?
Dreck means a lot of crap.
Oh, okay.
And he was leaving that out because that was just an expression of his heart, how hard it was for him to make a living to support the family. And
how old were you then?
At that time, I was 9, 10, 11 years old.
Were you being educated as a Jewish child at that time?
Not too much.
Was your father a very religious man?
My father was a religious man to the extent that he wasn't really an Orthodox, but he was a religious man.
How do you define that? What did you see about his life that made you think?
Well, whenever it came to a holiday, he was very, very observant of every holiday that came by. He would go to shul, and of course, he would always pick on me because you're the oldest son. So everything that he would do, and he had some shortcomings, he would leave it out on me because I was the oldest and I was supposed to know. When it came to a time where we got a job, the first thing that my dad never knew anything about furs, but we got a job at one time with a company called Ruderman, who made cloaks and suits and used fur collars on their cloaks and suits. Well, he got a job there, and not knowing anything at all about furs, it was quite basically simple. You would take the skin and cut it in half and sew the two back ends together and then have a pattern and nail the collar out on the pattern, and that would make your collar. You tape it and so forth. And I was with him at the time, so naturally as a youngster you pick up different ideas and knowledge about the thing, so we kept pretty busy with this fur collars from Ruderman. Well, this was about in 1922, 1923. And at least he was seeing a little bit of light of day. We'd have a hard time collecting our salary every week from Ruderman because he was one of the, during those days they had the, what we called the sweatshops, and if you could get away with it, why they would tell you they haven't got any money and pay you next week and so forth and hold you off. But we were pretty strict on that because he knew that there was a family that had to be supported. So we always fought Ruderman every week to get our check.
Did you get a check or did you get money?
Well, money, whatever it was. I know, I remember a check because he couldn't sign his name. This man was so ignorant. He had a big Volvanish son who was running the business with a big cigar in his mouth. But Ruderman had to sign the check, and the only thing he knew was he would make 10 strokes up and down with the fountain pen, and that was it. He didn't make no X or anything like that because after being a businessman it didn't look nice to make an X, but he learned how to make 10 straight up and down strokes, and that's the way he signed his name, with these 10 strokes. Came 1924, the union stepped in, there was a strike, and they left everybody go. We didn't belong to the union, and we thought we would be able to work, but as long as it was the company, they made us go out with the rest of them. We had no job. So not having a job, of course, put us back in a bad position. The few dollars that we had been able to save, we found a space over on Halsted and Roosevelt. There was a Schiff's Bank, and upstairs of the Schiff Bank was a loft.
Now you're talking an area at Roosevelt and Halsted, which today is considered to be like Maxwell Street, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's only a
Maxwell
block.
Street at that time was very big, you know.
It was a retail market place.
Yeah. There was a lot of manufacturers, and Turner Brothers was on the corner in different companies. 8 West Roosevelt, and I got acquainted through the Schiff's Bank of a company that was on what's your 12th and what? What couldn't be, was that Halsted? 12th and
I think
Halsted?
in 12th and Halsted.
There was Morgan Street.
Yeah, that was Halsted, sure. 12th and Halsted. The 12th Street Bank was on 12th and Halsted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got a hold of a company that was on Halsted Street that was making collars and cuffs, but a bigger operator than Ruderman used to be, and we got connected with him, and being that we were contractors for collars and cuffs, he became interested. Now, at that time there was a fur, Australian opossum was being used, and this Mr. Hyman said that he would like those Australian opossum, but everybody's using them natural. Could they be dyed black or could they be dyed brown? Well, my father, having the knowledge of dyes, said sure, he could. This was the start of something that the first chance he had of getting back into his own knowledge. And I remember going out, we bought a used drum at that time, and he dyed up, we got a lot of these here skins in from Minnesota, and we dyed up the Australian opossum in dark browns and in blacks and so forth, and he where we were successful in getting these colors. So we did a pretty fair amount of business. At least we were making a living and not doing any work for Ruderman anymore. We were working for Hyman.
Not yourself.
So no, well, this was our own business, yeah. Then, as we started doing this here, my father mentioned to me, and being a young kid, I must have been about 12 years old at that time, he said that there's places that we ought to go to instead of Halsted Street. Why don't we go into the market? So I said, well, let's go. So my father, being kind of timid about going into people, pushed me into it. Gay, do bass, I always go, gay, do bass.
And how old were you?
I was 12 years old then. And of course I had a knack for doing things. I remember at that time we lived on 12th in Roosevelt, huh? Not 12th. What was the street? Trip. Not Trip. 12th Street.
No, 12th never.
The
12th in the Spalding?
first place, the Spalding, that's it. That's what I'm trying to think of. North Spalding.
The 1259.
1259, something like that, yeah. On the Spalding.
Going down further.
And well, being that I come from a small town and I knew a little bit about bicycles and things of that sort, I often remember the incidents where we would be talking about bikes and these kids couldn't afford bikes. So I said, well, why don't we do what I used to do in Michigan City? We'd go to the junkyards and pick up bicycles and put them together. I knew all about the new departure brakes, and I knew all about the wheels and all that kind of stuff, how to tighten the spokes and the spoke wrenches. So I became the neighborhood mechanic for all these kids for their bicycles.
That was a time when there weren't too many automobiles either.
Not too many automobiles.
People used carts and horses.
There was a family across the street by the name of Combs.
Oh yeah, Benny Cone.
Benny Cone, Maxie Cone, and whenever their older brothers were cab drivers, and they would come home for lunch, and they would leave their yellow cabs in front of the house, and mischievous as we were fooling around with the yellow cabs, and they got the nerve to drive them around the block. And we drove the cars around the block.
Kids.
Yeah.
As us
Well, anyhow, Maxie Cone and I became kind of interested in fixing up cars from that.
You turned out to be a handsome kid.
Oh yeah. And we were pretty good. We would take the entire Fords apart and
Benny
fix the
was
brakes.
your friend later.
Benny was a little older than I was,
Oh.
and Maxie was younger. And we fixed the brakes and we overhauled the bearings. There was nothing to take a car apart. It was we could put it together pretty good. We bought a few old cars. I had a Jeffrey, I had a Ford,
Yeah.
and
The oldest thing.
we played around and we were real alley mechanics. In fact, is from that alley mechanic, Maxie Cone got a job with Lewis on Ogden Avenue, which was his first job as a mechanic, and he had a lot of friends, and they would come in and buy cars and ask Maxie to look the car over. Lewis took an interest in Maxie, and he says, why don't you come into the sales room and do selling instead of being a mechanic? And that started Maxie on his career as an automobile salesman.
Interesting event.
Rich
Now-
man. Did
now
he die?
Yeah, Maxie died.
Oh, too bad.
Uh,
He was a handsome man.
From Spalding Avenue, of course, we were very bad condition at that time. My mother, there was an epidemic of influenza. Dr. King was our doctor, and she was on the verge of death practically with the flu. And he pulled her through, and she always had a very strong liking for King. He was our family doctor, a real friend of the family.
Oh,
We
so
all
wonderful.
loved him.
So good to us. Didn't have no money.
Now, Sam was born at this time, because he was born in Chicago.
Yeah, Sam was born right around this time.
And about when was Sam born? Do you remember the year?
I would say that Sam was born about 19, let's see, Sam, 67, 50. 1920. 1920, 1922, 24.
He's a baby. I
You
got
see
the
60s.
picture. Oh, I'm there. The picture of Libby and Manny, of Libby.
Well, if that picture was taken when you were 17 years old, and Sam was in that picture.
Yeah, Sammy's in that picture. I was working for Irving Mann, or Bruce, or...
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get the specifics there when they're trying to remember.
And I bought him that's the first...
Mom, you told us about it.
No, but he don't remember. I bought that first
The sailor
suit in all wool. And I bought Libby that little fawn dress. We were going to a wedding. So that's how we took that picture. Whose wedding we were going to. And Libby was as thin as a rail. But when she was 15 years old, was she beautiful. But she
Philip, where did you go to school?
First, I went to Lawson Grammar School.
Where was that? In Chicago?
That was on 15th and Turner.
So did you go to school in Michigan City? Do you remember?
No.
must have.
I may have gone to kindergarten or something on there because I do have a vague recollection of some activities around the school. Winter sports, playing out around the snow and stuff like that. It must have gone because I was 9 years old when I came to Chicago. So I must have been going to school there before.
So you went to Lawson Elementary School in Chicago.
Lawson Elementary, and then I went to Marshall High.
All right.
2 years of Marshall High, and then I had to quit. Because we weren't making a living, we couldn't continue.
You didn't finish Marshall High?
No.
No fool.
No.
How are you so bright?
He learned a lot in 2 years. Took a fast acceleration.
I always thought...
And at that time, it was just in about this time that we're talking about with the furs. And from the dying of the furs, I had a little sort of, always had the ability of improvising. Even as a kid, I would take clocks apart and things of that sort, and I could always, if something was missing, I could put in a part that didn't belong and it would still work. And to this day, I'm what I would call an improviser. When the furs were started to get popular as collars and cuffs, and we were, after all, we were just a small factor in the collar and cuff business. We had this here place, and at that time my uncle Udall wanted to come to the United States, and of course everybody thought the Kaspers were wealthy, you know, they're taking care of a family and everything else, but we lived from mouth to mouth. And I remember Mr. From the Liberty National Bank on Halsted and 12 used to like me as a boy, and he used to talk to me, and I remember one of the things once I was standing there talking with him, and he says, "You see that scrub lady over there?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "When that woman talks, listen, because you might learn something from her." He says, "Nobody knows everything," he says, "but listen to everybody." And he also, they had a big slogan at that time which said, "A part of what I earn belongs to me." And he was the first one that told me, "You go to the bank with your $5 bills once a week. Let your friends go to the bank with their $20 bills once a month. At the end of the year, you will have $5 in the bank every week. They won't have the $20 to put in the bank every month because they can't afford to put in $20. You only think that you're going to do it tomorrow. But when that $20 comes around the end of the month, you are just as bad off as you were in the beginning. But your $20 is already in the bank."
That's $5.
He taught me that. A part of what you earn belongs to me.
Which bank was that?
That was the Liberty National Bank.
Oh.
What was his name? It was an Irish name, Mr. Kelly or something like that. I forget what it was. Well, anyhow, one of the turnarounds of going into the fur business was when I happened to meet a young man who was older than I was by the name of Sam Fader.
Fader. I remember.
Fader cloaks and suits. A father and son operated business with a sister. They're real sharp people, but I mean shrewd Jewish people. Sam was a dynamo. He was a guy who was dedicated completely to his business. He thought nothing else of except making money. And he liked me because he thought I knew a lot about furs, which I pretended to know, and he believed me.
That's good.
The great imposter.
Yeah. So, and we were making, he says, Phil, I want you to make some
What is
wolf.
that?
Listen to this.
Yeah.
I want you to make some wolf collars for me.
Wolf.
He said, I need a couple hundred wolf collars.
They were cheap.
And the wolf skin, I mean, as little as you might know about the furs, I figured that there was only one way to do it, and that was to cut the skin in half and use one half for one coat and the other half for the other coat. And for cuffs, we would cut up a skin for 2 pair of cuffs. And we made some collars like this. I must have made maybe 50 or 100 collars. He says, something is wrong. They're not the collars that they're getting out of New York. And I couldn't figure out what the hell it was that we were doing wrong. I had nobody to ask because everything came out of New York then. Meantime, we were accumulating a lot of wolf tails and wolf pieces and throwing them into the corner. We couldn't get rid of them. So the corner kept getting bigger. One day, Sam come in and says, Phil, he says, we got a hell of a big order. He says, but I'm sorry, I can't take your collars and cuffs. They're not what we're supposed to have. What we want to make. He says, something you're not doing right. I said, well, I'll have to work on it and see what I'm doing wrong. He says, and I got a man by the name of Herman Waits who's got 1,000 wolves that he wants to sell me. And I want you to look at them for the quality. Again, I say I didn't know anything about furs, but he thought I did. We went over there, and I was particularly interested in the wolves being long enough to make the length of the collar. Went over there, look at the wolves. They were very reasonable, but they were small. And I said to Waits, we can't use these, they're too small. He said, what do you mean small? They'll make a collar and cuff. He said, that's what they're for. I said, how the heck are you going to get a collar and cuff out of them?
Could you
And
use
listen to
what you
this.
had?
He goes like this, with his finger, the skin is laying there. He says, well, there's your collar and there's your cuff. When he did that,
Isn't that
it was just like
something?
an electric bulb burst in my head. And all of a sudden, I got very impatient and I couldn't wait
Till he got
to
out.
try what I just thought I found out.
All those pieces.
So I said to Sam, I said, Sam, why don't we buy 10 skins for a trial and see how it will come out? And Waits agreed to give us 10 skins. I ran back to the shop and I split the skin.
You were smart.
Took it, made an X through the middle.
You were
Took
real smart.
took the rear end of the skin and brought the 2 rear ends together, joining them in the center, which when they put the collar on, both sides were alike. My way, the head was here and the rump was there, so that's what I didn't like. And this one, all of a sudden, you got 2 rumps, split this cuff in half, the cuffs matched perfectly, and I was jumping for joy. I call up Sam, I says, Sam, I says,
I got
I
it.
think we got it.
Uh-huh.
So he comes over and he says, these look real good, and he got impatient and he started making, he says, make me up a half a dozen, use up all the skins and see what's what. Well, later on, with Sam, just to give you an idea of the man's energy, he was one of the first men who would fly 1,000,000 miles a year. And it was nothing for him to travel 3 different cities in a day, by plane, by car, very fast, tremendous energy. Nobody could work for him because he wanted everybody to be like him. He got some of the top salesmen, he'd work a week and he'd fire them. And I used to say, Sam, everybody can't be like you. This man is good. He's not good enough for me. He come back, that after those samples were made, he come back, he says, we got an order for 1,000 coats.
To you? Oh,
That
boy.
means 1,000 collars. He's the manufacturer of the coats.
Yeah, I understand.
And oh, we were so those are the, I remember those days because those are the happy days, you might say, from the constant suffering. All of a sudden, he hit a jackpot, and he come back and he sold those thousands. He had those. So he put on help. He put in more machinery. He took an extra loft. He subcontracted.
See, he helped.
And he.
That's why he was good. He was very fast, but he still wanted to help you to do things.
Well, I mean, we were very, very easy to work with each other.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
And he started getting big. And at that time, when we were doing this kind of work, we were able to bring in my Uncle Udall from Europe and put him to work for us. Of course, when he came, Udall was the kind of a guy that if he did something, he was very quiet. He never talked. Very stolz.
Yeah.
If he did something, he always had the feeling that he's doing it. Nobody tells you what to do. He's doing it. See? And he started acquiring certain knowledge in the fur business. And we'd get into discussions and so forth and so on. And then we got into the sealing business, and I started making sealing coats.
What is sealing?
Sealing is rabbit fur dyed into a seal. Northern seal.
And you called it what?
Sealing. Seal-line. At that time, muskrats was the top. Muskrat, Hudson seal, I should say, was the dyed muskrat. Hudson seal was the most important fur in the fur business. Everything was Hudson seal. And I learned how to make Hudson seal in my own way from watching and opening up coats and looking to see how they made it and what they did. And then I began. My dad knew nothing about these things, but he was not a furrier. But
Did he
I
help
learned
you
how to
do
make
it?
zigzags. And my dad was in a lot of ways was very much on the order of Joe. You'd show them a way, they would accept it, and that's locked in up to that point. I was different, and I'm that way with my golf. I'm still learning, trying, experimenting with my golf game at my age. I'm never satisfied with a certain specific thing when I can know that somebody else is doing something. And same with fishing. I mean, I don't have no locked-in way of fishing. I fish with anticipation and experimental all the time. And this was the nature of myself with the fur business. Not knowing anything about a pattern, how to make a coat, all right, I thought I knew something about the furs. I decided the only thing to do is to go out and learn how to make patterns. So I took a course in the Master Designing Corporation, the Staten Lake building, a Polish man there, and he was dressmaking. He dressmaking patterns. But furs, and the pattern was no different, just to apply a fur knowledge to the pattern knowledge. And I still got my diploma in 1925, this I remember.
Go on.
I still got my diploma of fur designing, Master School of Fur Designing, Philip Kasper, 1925.
The Wonder Blooms wanted you to make patterns for them. Huh? When did they find that out?
Who?
Blooms on Michigan Avenue.
I never.
Oh, sure. Later.
Well, I mean, a little incidents that come up with pattern making, that was something else again.
No,
But this all came up from picked up knowledge. And then I started making some coats on my patterns, and of course we did pretty good
How
with
did
them.
Mac get into that then?
Mac was in the insurance business.
But how did he learn to get into the...
Mac has an aptitude. Mac has a very strong aptitude for doing things in a lot of ways. Joe does not have that aptitude. Joe is smarter than both of us.
Go on.
Joe is smarter than both of us from a certain form of intelligence. Joe is a very intelligent person. He's handicapped by being a poor man.
I think so.
Absolutely. I find myself at
Well,
fault
no,
many times because he blamed me for all the years that he worked, and I, not once but maybe 1,000 times, says, Joe, you're not getting a salary out of this business. We got 3 families in this goddamn business. We can't afford 3. You got to go out and get yourself a job. Why should you work for a small? And I didn't want to pay him a lot because I couldn't pay him a lot, and I didn't want to pay him more so that he would stay with me.
But he wouldn't.
Mac and I could have handled the business because Mac had, as I say, an aptitude for selling.
And he had.
Joe didn't. And Mac had an aptitude for making things. Joe didn't.
Yes, too bad though, wasn't it?
Now, I mean, it's talking about
Yeah.
it characteristically, of course, and
But
when I got
why-
to be designing the patterns and so forth, that became easier to make coats, and that's how I became a furrier. I mean, from the
But
coats and
he
stuff.
couldn't do that.
Joe worked for us making Persian lambs. Joe would be very basic, very specific. I don't say he didn't do his day's job, but he was, I shouldn't say this, he was an unnecessary factor, and he could have been a very successful man had he gone out and taken a chance and gone and did something else and gone to work. Mac the same way. Had Mac stayed in the insurance business, he'd have been a very successful man.
My.
Never should he come back into the fur business. In 1929 came the crash. I was in business at that time with a man by the name of, no, I was in self-business. We were in the Adams Express building.
Yeah.
Where they used to pull the elevator up with this
Yeah, that was
change
right
your
near
problems.
the- yeah.
The Adams Express building. People liked me.
We always
Skin
had
dealers all liked me. Whatever, Phil, if I wanted to know something, they would tell me. As I talk, what comes to my mind? Here's Mr. Krupp next door, an older man. Very fond
I
of
think
me.
I remember, you
Krupp
know that?
in the
I
Adams Express
remember a
building.
lot of things.
I'm in the
Phil.
cloak and suit business. I'm in the collar and cuff business.
Yeah.
He comes back from New York. It's funny how things will come up to you that you never even dreamed about, didn't even know. Comes back from New York, a very Jewish man. Jap Minks! Jap Minks! I said, who the heck was Jap Minks? I'm telling you, Jap Minks. Okay, we go walking down the street. We go walking down the street, and he's telling me about this coming up. Oh, there's Mr. Price from Price Cloaks and Suits. We approach Mr. Price. I'm just a kid. I don't know. I'm not talking.
Turn that thing.
I'm not talking. I'm just a kid. We approach Mr. Price, and here's Mr. Krupp's method. Hello, how you doing? What's doing? Yeah, not too much. Yeah, it's nothing doing here either, you know. When you're in New York, he says, yeah, I was in New York, but nothing special. What's doing by you? He says, well, he says, I don't know, I think the Jap Minks are going to be good this year. Krupp looks at him and says, Jap Minks? Who's going to use Jap Minks? That opened the man up. The first thing the man says, what do you mean Jap Minks? Jap Minks are blah, 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 who's using it, who's got it, blah, 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 blah. 10 minutes the guy's talking, he opened them up and, that's all. You don't say. Is that so? You don't say. Is that so? You don't say. I'm sitting there, I'm not so. I'm learning. He says goodbye to the guy, walks away, and he says, you see? I says, why didn't you tell him? I says, you're not like my father. I mean, things that I remember.
Yeah.
Jap Minks, Mr. Krupp.
Do you have some more now, or
I don't know.
I think we've reached a good point. To,
All right.
you. This is Jason David with his daddy. 1 month and 2 days, 3 days
3 days.
after his arrival in the world. Hey, look at the guy. He's saying, I'm about to take a nap. Another nap, he says. Let's see what a napping guy looks like. Hi there, young guy. He looks like a napperoni.
I'm gonna take a nap.
He came here, he was wide awake.
He wasn't wide awake. He was kind of.
Well, he's telling us now. Let's hear what he's saying.
Kidnapped him. We covered him up, blindfolded him, and didn't tell him where we were going.
He's singing. Let's listen to him sing.
Now, how's somebody's going to be all together?
Yeah, and how's his mother doing after this 1 month and 2 days?
He's over there.
Here's the mother. Hi, Lise. Boy, you've come a long ways in the hospital bed. Since the hospital bed.
My hair's washed.
Yeah. How you feeling?
I'm feeling much better.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
Oh, it's very nice of you to reply.
I hate these things.
Yes.
I would not be good at
Want to see how tired Jason is?
Jason is going to show us how tired he is. How tired is
How
Jason?
tired are you?
Oh, my goodness.
His great
My
grandma,
goodness.
you know why? I was on Oakland Street yesterday, and
Is that what we call letting it all hang out?
Wampa wampa.
Lisa
Yeah.
here.
I'm
I went to Oakland Street yesterday in that great big fruit store.
Like, 3 generations in the life of Jason David Silverman.
Shanny Cobb.
Who took his finger
Boy,
away
my
and said,
gorgeous
"Don't touch
coat."
me, Grandpa." Did you ever see a kid who sleeps better and looks so good?
Adorable, isn't
This is
he?
a young man.
Adorable.
I'm sorry, handsome. I know your friends in high school won't like the tape when they see this.
Did we see his, could be stopping the tape may be running out.
He's sleeping.
No, I wasn't pressing it right.
He's singing
Okay,
us
then
a
we'll say,
song.
"Hi, Mommy."
Hi,
Mommy,
I'm
doing?
sleeping. I'm sleeping.
You hear him singing? That's Pavarotti, who we talked about.
You're gonna be, one day you're gonna be sitting at home and say, "Hey friends, high school friends, you wanna see the tape when I was a little boy?"
1 month old, and he's now 22 inches long,
22 inches from here
and he's
to here.
lost about half the hair that he was born with.
Here, no hair here, no hair at all.
If I was him,
Schnitzky hairline.
What does Mommy call him?
Mommy calls him Julius.
Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar.
spitballs, he should spit.
We'll feed you grapes. We'll feed you
And he's
grapes.
2 pounds heavier than when he was a new
I
arrival.
think
10
it's about 2.5,
Yeah, 10 pounds, 2 ounces.
Depends on whether
which
he's
is probably
made.
10.5 now.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun.
That's good. Just press the red button and it will stop.
How?
But I don't agree with Jerry that he was saying it's going to take some message back, that we're going to bomb Saddam Hussein back to the Middle East.
General Wickham, what do you think about that kind?
Most of his